Hey folks, it's the Blind Guy here. Today we're taking a look at the Dyatlov Pass Incident. 9 hikers go missing in 1959. Mysterious circumstances. What happened to them? Let's talk about it. I'll see you on the other side.
What does the world look like to someone who is visually impaired? Yes, tell us all what you see. What do you see? What do you see? Tell us what is right, what is wrong, what is art, what is vision. We welcome you to A Blind Guy's View.
Okay, folks, so taking a little break from the movies here to talk about a little bit of it's not so much an urban legend, it really happened, but a mystery, a really creepy mystery. This episode, though, is brought to you by my book, The Epic Book of Urban Folk and Urban Legends, which this is in there because I wasn't sure what other book to put it in. And so I give you a write-up in this and some of the theories and some of the problems with the theories and everything. And then as always, you guys know all my videos are brought to you by my first ever novel, the fantasy novel Epic as Lily, which right now has got some pretty good reviews on Amazon. I'm super excited about that. It's really fun. This is the hardcover version. The links to both of those are in the description. I'm not monetized, so that's the best way to support the channel is just check these out. They're also on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have that for free, you can go read them, flip through them, and that helps support the channel. Leave a review. That would be awesome. But without further ado, let's talk about the Dyatlov Pass Incident. So first, I'm going to send us on over to get a little rundown exactly what we're talking about. And then on the other side, I'll tell you what I think may have happened. So here we go.
It was the winter of 1959, deep in the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. 10 hikers, students, and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on what was supposed to be a challenging but routine expedition. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was 23 years old, disciplined, sharp, and known for his calm under pressure. The team's goal was to ski across the northern Urals and reach a remote peak ominously called Dead Mountain by the native Mansi people. Its proper name was Kholat Syakhl. They left Sverdlovsk on January 23rd, riding a train into the frozen wilderness, laughing, singing, and documenting every step with cameras and diaries. But as the weather worsened, one of them, Yuri Yudin, fell ill with severe joint pain and reluctantly turned back. He had no idea that he'd never see his friends alive again. The remaining 9 pressed on, trudging through snowstorms and temperatures that dipped below 40 degrees Celsius. On February 1st, they set up camp on an open slope of Kholat Syakhl, rather than the safety of the forest below. No one knows exactly why. Maybe they wanted to challenge themselves, or maybe they lost daylight and decided to stay put. Either way, that small choice would become the center of one of the greatest mysteries in modern history. When the group failed to return on schedule, a search team went out. What they found weeks later would baffle investigators, horrify families, and launch decades of speculation that continues to this day. On February 26th, rescuers found the group's tent half buried in snow, torn open from the inside. Inside were boots, coats, food, even money and cameras. It looked as though everyone had fled in a panic, into the freezing night barely dressed. Some had only socks on, a few were barefoot. About a mile downhill, the searchers discovered the first 2 bodies, lying near a cedar tree beside the remains of a small fire. Both were only in their underwear. The tree above them had broken branches, as if they'd tried to climb it, maybe to look for something, or escape from something. A little farther on, they found 3 more bodies: Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova and Rustam Slobodin, frozen in poses that looked like they were crawling back toward the tent. All had died of hypothermia, but the last 4 hikers, found months later under the snow in a ravine, told a darker story. 2 months after the first 5 bodies were found, melting snow revealed the remaining 4 in a ravine about 75 meters farther into the woods. These weren't simply victims of the cold. Something far stranger had happened. One hiker had a crushed chest, another a fractured skull. Yet there were no external wounds, as if the damage came from enormous pressure. One woman was missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her lips. Another's hair had turned grayish-white, though she was only in her early 20s. Their clothing showed traces of radiation, faint but measurable. Investigators were stunned. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. The footprints leading away were calm, almost orderly, and then chaos. No sign of another party, no struggle, no avalanche debris large enough to explain such injuries. The snow was deep but undisturbed. The official report concluded that the hikers died from a compelling natural force. That phrase alone became legend. Families were left with more questions than answers, and as the years went on, theories multiplied, some scientific, others supernatural. The most accepted explanation is still the avalanche theory. Maybe a small slab of snow collapsed onto their tent in the night. Startled and half-dressed, they cut their way out and fled, thinking a full avalanche was coming. Disoriented in the dark, they froze before realizing the danger had passed. But skeptics point out there was little avalanche evidence, and the tent's angle was too shallow. Another theory suggests a Soviet military test, perhaps secret parachute mines or radiation experiments. That could explain the glowing orbs some witnesses claimed to see in the sky that night and the radioactive traces on clothing. Yet no records ever surfaced to prove it. Others whisper about infrasound, a low-frequency vibration caused by the mountain's wind that can trigger panic and disorientation. Some even invoked folklore, the Mansi spirits, a Yeti attack, or alien visitors. But the simplest truth may be this: 9 exhausted hikers trapped in brutal cold made a split-second decision that spiraled out of control. Panic, confusion, and nature did the rest. To this day, Dyatlov Pass remains a place of quiet snow and unanswered questions. A memorial now stands there, etched with 9 names and one man, Yuri Yudin, who lived to carry their memory for the rest of his life.
Okay, so let's talk about this. So I first heard about this probably about 15 years ago. That was back when, message forums were a thing, and it was going around on the message forums quite a bit. And I always thought this was one of the most interesting stories I'd ever read about, because you have 9 people that should behave rationally because they're experienced in what they're doing, all behaving in a way that appears to be irrational when you first look at it. And that always bothers me when something like that happens, because it makes sense if you have one person that happens to, but all 9 of them. And it reminds me of, I don't know if you guys have seen or read the story, Picnic at Hanging Rock. Now, that came out in 1966, and this happened in 1959. I don't know if this influenced that story, because I'm not sure if this was very widely known in 1966, because the Soviet Union was pretty good about covering things up. Anything bad that happened under the Soviet Union was usually covered up. So I'm not sure exactly when the Western world found out about this, but it is very similar to Picnic at Hanging Rock, which is a fictitious story about these girls that go on a picnic in Australia, and then just weird things happen there. Like several of them walk off and disappear, and you get these different accounts as to what happened. And so it's very similar to this. We have people that seem to be experienced and very rational, behaving in a way that's irrational. To be honest, I honestly do not know what happened here. For me, I think you have to make an inference to the best explanation. And So I do that by ruling out things that I don't think make a lot of sense. And so you'll hear things like the avalanche theory. I don't think that makes sense because to me, something compelled these hikers to put their tent out in the open like that. If you look at where they were camped, they were quite a ways from the timber on the side of this bare hillside, which it's like very cold outside, -20, -30 degrees Fahrenheit. And so something compelled them to do that because as a cross country skier and backpacker, you would never just do that. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And then there's reports about them actually cutting holes in the side of the tent that they could look out of. And you wouldn't do that either unless something had compelled you to camp out there instead of in the timber and had compelled you to keep watch outside your tent. So something I think scared them, had them startled up to the point of going out there. So to me, it doesn't seem like it's a sudden event that happened that night. It's something that they had experienced for a few days. So I don't think the avalanche theory makes a lot of sense. Also, if you see the actual campsite, you can find videos of it. It doesn't appear to me, as somebody who lives in very snowy areas a lot of the time in the winter, it doesn't appear to me to be any kind of avalanche risk. It's not a very steep slope. And so to me, that one doesn't make sense. Sometimes you'll hear that, well, they must have eaten something that caused them all to go crazy. I don't think that makes sense either, because to get 9 people to all have the same physiological effect from eating something, and doesn't make a lot of sense for them to all react the same way to it. And secondly, it doesn't make sense that they would have all eaten the same thing, because I think they had a lot of their own food packed. And so there were reports that their stove had not been used that night. It was all packed up and had been packed for going the next day. So that one doesn't make sense to me either. And then you have explanations for them missing their clothing as to it being a form of paradoxical undressing, which is a phenomenon that happens during hypothermia, where the person starts feeling extremely overly warm, and so they start taking their clothes off. But these people left their tent in minimal clothing. They didn't leave their tent in their clothing and then take it off. In fact, some of them seem to have stripped the dead bodies of their clothes and then put those on. So obviously something caused them to leave their tent in a hurry, so much so in a hurry that they were very poorly dressed for the climate outside. We get then some reports of somebody maybe stalking them, like the local native tribes from that area. I also call them Native Americans. It doesn't make any sense. Native Ukrainian tribes. To me, it doesn't match up with what was found, because it says that there were no other tracks found from any other people in the area. And it seemed like the local indigenous tribes were pretty friendly to backpackers and things like that. And so we're starting to whittle down a little bit here. The military experiments, this is a possibility. I don't know 100% why that would make you leave your tent. I think that if you heard explosions or things outside, you'd be more likely to stay inside your tent than to leave it out in the cold weather like that. So I'll put that down as a possibility, especially given the secretive nature of the Soviet Union and everything. It's very possible they could have been trying something out there at that time. So let's put that one down. This notion of the cyclonic wind and the sounds that would make people go crazy. I don't know. Seems possible, but I don't know how likely those things actually happen or anything like that. Now, aliens. I personally don't believe in aliens, intelligent life traveling hundreds of thousands of light years just to scare 9 campers out of their tent. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, if you believe in that, then that could be one of the explanations. To me, the fact they put their tent out there in that position and then cut holes in it means that whatever was scaring them was lasting a lot longer than some UFO crash landing or something like that. So I don't personally buy the alien theory. And so to me, now this is a big given because I don't know this, but I'm not a materialist, so I'm open to supernatural type ideas. But given if there is such a thing as a Yeti, a large primate that's bipedal, to me, that makes the most sense for this encounter. And I know that sounds pretty crazy, but I think that the existence of a large bipedal primate in the Ural Mountains is far more likely than extraterrestrials somehow defying all scientific knowledge with space travel and making it hundreds of thousands of miles to come here and then poke holes in our cattle and drain their blood and terrorize hikers. That doesn't to me, make any kind of sense. So if it's a Yeti, I think there is a line of evidence that does support that it would be something that maybe had been stalking them for a couple days and that caused them to want to put their tent out there instead of in the timber. If something was stalking you in the woods, I think you would want to have your tent out in the open and be able to cut holes and look for whatever was stalking you. And then secondly, one of the women in her diaries actually put one of the last lines in her diaries was, from now on, we'll know that snowmen are real. And in the Ukrainian and Russian culture, that's the term they use for Yeti, is snowmen. She wasn't talking about the things you build as a kid. That's the term they would use for a Yeti. So is that just a weird coincidence? Why would she say that if she knew she could say from now on we know that they're real? Had they found tracks? Had they actually seen something? There is also a picture that was found on one of the rolls that to me is most likely one of the men in the party, but it is a very creepy type picture because it's blurry, that some people have said they think it's some kind of abominable snowman type figure looking at them through the trees. I think it's so hard to tell, but I think if you look at it and you try to be objective, to me it looks like it's wearing the same type of coat that the men were wearing, and Yetis don't wear coats, so I don't think that's actually what that picture is. But that diary entry is real, and I think it's very, very interesting. So those are the two most likely to me. If the Yeti is real, then I would say that's most likely. And then if it turns out that there is no such thing as a Yeti, then the military exercises to me make a lot of sense. The trace levels of radiation, I think, are often blown out of proportion. They had some radiation on their clothing, but it was very, very low levels, like something you might have from working in a laboratory or something. So in the Soviet Union at that time, in the 1950s, it'd be very possible you could just pick that up naturally through the wind and things like that, because we all know the Soviets were not necessarily the most conservationally minded people on the planet. So the fact that they would have tested weaponry that maybe was radioactive in that area would not be surprising to me in the slightest. The woman missing her eyes and her her eyes and her tongue and lips is often explained as some kind of scavenger, like an animal did that. But it's like, why would it only do it to that woman if they're all dead? And then also, they were buried under several meters of snow. And so to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense that an animal could even find their bodies under that amount of snow. Some people believe that they maybe were running and they fell into this ravine and then the snow covered them. I have no idea how they ended up under that much snow and a ways away from the three that were going back to the tent. And there was two more bodies by the tree where they had started trying to make a fire. So here you have 9 people all leave their tent, barely dressed. They end up down by this tree and they start trying to make a fire. One of them appears to have tried to climb the tree and broke some branches off and fell and cracked his head. And then 2 of them die there. The other 4 go missing totally. And then the other 3 are found dead crawling back to the tent. And then later the other 4 are found under meters of snow, like 75 yards away. It's such a weird story, and it really bothers me that I can't quite figure out what's going on in this story. Some of them did have some internal injuries, I believe some broken ribs and things like that. The cracked skull, I guess you could make the argument that he received that falling out from a tree. Yeah, it's just one of those strange things. And I guess it bothered the 10th hiker who didn't go, who got sick. I guess it really bothered him the rest of his life. And you'd wonder what happened to your friend, because he would have seen them before they left out there and would have known they were fine before they went. So, yeah, let me know in the comments, guys. I'm not trying to put down anybody else's explanation. I'm just trying to work through it in my head, taking out the things that don't make a lot of sense to me. And yeah, let me know what you guys think, and check out my books. And I'll see you on the next episode of A Blind Guy's View. Laters on the Menjay.
Laters on the Menjay.
Night, stories written, pages bright, by his books enjoy the sight. Oh, a blind guy's calling, hear his view, trivia tells and insights true, movies, myths and books to choose, raise your glass to a blind guy's view.